As someone who got the 2024 election completely correct, even down to the most minuscule of details, got every single state right, got plenty of the major counties right, the percentages almost damn correct, and the popular vote correct, how can I best predict the NFL playoff bracket? So, as we can see here, there's about 14 teams that are going to be competing against each other very shortly. And I'm going to, to the best of my ability, really try to get this as correct as possible. Now, for this, we have plenty of different methods to really correlate what the victory is going to look like for me getting this completely accurate. So, for instance, we have betting odds. We have obviously 18 weeks of NFL football we could base an opinion off of. But I personally can tell you right now, I've seen virtually every single NFL game this year in the past 2 years. So, I have a genius level of real accuracy here. So, let's just get to the bottom line here. So, predicting the first slate of games for the wild card, the first one is going to be Chargers at the Texans. Honestly, this matchup is looking pretty good for both teams. What do I mean? The Chargers are run heavy. That being said, though, the run game can be hit or miss depending on what running back is injured. As we can see here for J.K. Dobbins, the guy is basically the lead back for the Chargers, and he's questionable, which is interesting. So either he is going to be fine or he'll be somebody who is at a depleted state, really running against a playoff Texans defense, and that's going to be really rough to watch. We also do have some factors that are playing into the Chargers' hand, though. You have a 53% chance, according to this website, with the AZ Central. And so betting odds are kind of all over the place. You even look at different websites like this one by NFL, and you'll notice that the Chargers, though, are pretty lowly in the stats. They're the fifth rated to make the Super Bowl in total. And so when you're looking at it that way, they are a little bit below the Texans when you look at the grand scheme of things. So it's a confusing thing to really predict here, as you would predict the Texans to have a pretty weak O line. The defense for the Chargers has been pretty well established as one of the better ones in the league. And then you also have a quarterback battle between CJ Stroud, who has had a recession since his freshman year, which is amazing. And then that rookie year, which again was really good, is also followed up by a guy who was a really good rookie in his own right, Herbert. Now, Justin Herbert likely is going to play better in this game just because Justin Herbert and the Chargers have had a total of 9 turnovers only this season. And so for that reason, I'm going to give Herbert and the Chargers the victory over the Texans. I'd say it'd be like a 3 to a 7 point difference there. And so while the Chargers win this game, the Texans have to, just keep in mind also that paper mache offensive line that Stroud has had to really suffer by. And kind of like Andrew Luck there, you'll notice that again, the Texans are not really built to win here. The defense might carry them over though, but I'll just lean towards Texans, or sorry, Chargers for now. Next up, we have the Steelers versus the Ravens at obviously in Baltimore. Now, this is a game that everybody's pretty confident will go for the Baltimore Ravens. And I'm pretty much of that opinion, so nothing too spicy here. Now, Ravens have a basically 3-4 chance of winning this game against the Steelers. And the reason why a lot of people would say this is because the Steelers have been basically limping into the playoffs. Now, what I mean by that statement is that the Steelers have lost their most recent 4 games, and it looks like Russ isn't really connecting with George Pickens, nor is Pickens even healthy for those past 4 weeks. He's been healthy maybe 1 or 2 games out of those 4. And so what you're really relying for the Steelers to have a chance here is for maybe Lamar or the Ravens in general to fumble, turn over the ball once or twice, but namely, obviously, that you win a game off of turnovers. But aside from the obvious, I would like to point out the fact that the Steelers need to have deep bomb targets landed. Again, not even thrown to Pickens, but caught and ran with by Pickens, okay? Because Pickens, I think, had several drops in the most recent game with Russell Wilson. And so Russell Wilson, again, cooks off the moon ball. You need this to be a factor that makes the Steelers competitive in the offensive scheme. Because, again, Steelers defense always pretty good. They call it, what, like the Iron Curtain or Steel Curtain. Bottom line, though, is that the Steelers do not have a great offense, and I do believe that that will do them in. In fact, their receiver core is pretty depleted. They have Mike Williams, who's a shell of himself from a few years ago. And like I said, George Pickens, a diva, dollar store AB, maybe. Anyway, as for my final prediction for this game in the wildcard week, I will tell you that I have the Ravens beating the Steelers by about 10. I'd predict the score to be somewhere around 24-14, maybe 27-17. It seems to me as if Russ will have like a 6 out of 10 game. I'll probably reminisce over this game by saying, yeah, Russell tried, he did an all right job, but he was kind of outgunned. And that seems to be what the narrative will be after this game is over. So I think my prediction will hold up there. We also do have on Sunday Denver Broncos at the Bills. Now, the Bills have a 68.1% chance of beating the Broncos. The Broncos that beat the brakes off of the B team, overflow team of the Kansas City Chiefs in week 18. But does that really lend credence to what they can do in the playoffs? I doubt it. Now, for Sean Payton's team here in Denver, I do believe that they're going to go to Buffalo and they're going to lose pretty tragically. While they do have a pretty impressive defense, you have to keep in mind that the offense will not be up to par as compared to the Buffalo defense, in my opinion. So there's a mismatch. Also, keep in mind that when you look at the Denver defensive strengths, you're looking at a team that likely is going to rely on people like Patrick Surtain II. The thing about the Bills nowadays, as before when they had Stephon Diggs, who might have been locked up by PS2, seems like what the Bills will do is have a more diverse offensive play sheet, and more than that, even more of a even loaded weapon list. And what I mean is that before you had like Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, who sucks low key, and nobody's beneath that in the roster. Now the receiver core for Buffalo is a lot more even. So when you lock down just one guy, maybe he locks down Keon Coleman, PS2 cannot then guard Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, Amari Cooper, etc. So you have to pick one guy out of like 4 or 5 average or above average players for Buffalo, whereas before they only had 1 or 2 good ones. And so that offense is more diverse for a good change now, because Buffalo seems to be more poised to, again, beat out the advantages that otherwise would be good for the team that plays at a mile high. Like, again, that home stadium advantage for Denver in the playoffs would be tremendous. They didn't get it. And so Buffalo will definitely easily destroy the Broncos, in my opinion. I think Buffalo beats Denver by upwards of 2 touchdowns. Now, that's a little radical, but I just think that it's a really good pairing, okay? A very good matchup for Buffalo. Now, moving on, we're going to go to the fire game. This game will be bananas, okay? It'll be the Rams versus the Vikings, who, despite having, 14 or 15 wins, will go to Arizona, my Cardinal Stadium, to go against the Rams. Now, who do I have winning this? Looking at the odds right now, Minnesota Vikings are projected to have a 54% odds of beating the Rams here, which is kind of a low ball. If you would have looked at the regular season, you would have said, oh, wow, Vikings versus Rams. You'd have the Vikings winning by a lot. But truth is that actually the Rams beat the Vikings earlier this year. Now, this was the beginning of the Rams comeback when they were starting the year off at 1-4 and then made a race to 10-7 damn near. So the bottom line here is that the Rams look to be heating up, whereas the Vikings had such an emasculating defeat, losing the 1 seed to the Detroit Lions. I think they lost 31-9. Darnold playing absolutely terrified of what he had had to deal with. I guess the spotlight was too much for the guy. And so, again, seeing ghosts like he did in New York years ago, Darnold seems to be kind of in a weakened state mentally, kind of fragile. And so that fragility might do the Vikings in, honestly, in this complete mishmash. This is a very hard game to predict, in my opinion. Though I will say the Vikings will do a lot better than they did against Detroit. Will either team have a home advantage? I would say Vikings have more people in that stadium, in the Cardinal Stadium, State Farm. So that's a small advantage, though. When you really think about it, though, the Rams do have a good shot here. Now let's look at how the players match up, though. So my final verdict on this game and the way I see it playing out is that the Vikings will beat the Rams by an embarrassing low amount, because again, their roster is much better. I would say the Vikings beat the Rams by maybe 3. Call it maybe 24-21 in Arizona. I do think that this is going to be a really telling game, though, because again, the dynamic here is very interesting because you have Brian Flores with a very complicated defensive scheme, but you saw that Sean McVay outcoached Flores, kind of in part because he kind of flustered Flores with the activation of Puka Nacua early off of IR, which I guess they didn't really plan for in the defensive briefings that earlier that week, in week 8, I think it was, of this regular season. Therefore, I do think that the Vikings defense will play better this time. But again, will McVay find some trick play to kind of overcompensate for Brian Flores' genius? Or am I overthinking it? Anyways, chat, I do think Minnesota will win this, not by enough to really say like, oh, wow, we beat the lowly Rams, but they will beat the Rams in my opinion. Moving on, though, we do have Commanders versus Buccaneers. So, revisiting week 1, we obviously see that the Buccaneers trounced the Commanders. Now, there's a couple things you need to note here for the playoff matchup, though. So, first of all, they had Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and they were, presumptively healthy teams. Now, the reason why I point that out is because there is no Chris Godwin as of several weeks ago. So that leaves Baker Mayfield with less offensive options, though we do have Bucky Irving having a breakout as of the last several weeks. And so that might kind of somewhat offset the difference there. That being said, the Commanders also, I think, have gotten proportionately better than the Buccaneers insofar as when they started to where they are now. So I do think the Commanders are probably going to beat the Buccaneers. We'll call it 3 to 7 points. I'll say officially 3 for the record. The reason being is because I think Jaden Daniels is more versatile than Baker Mayfield by virtue of his scrambling ability. But I do think also that Jaden Daniels is really good as an offensive weapon, period. rookie of the year probably. And I think that Baker, in the playoffs that I've seen him in, not too bad, honestly. He got close against Detroit, in fact, last year, and he beat the Eagles in Tampa Bay 2 years ago, I believe. But the truth is, though, is that I still somehow gut feeling wise still believe the Commanders to be the better team, and I do think that Tampa Bay is just a little bit overhyped here. And I think it's because people like Baker Mayfield and he's all right. But I'm kind of contrarian. So we're going Commanders. Also, to kind of make myself sound smart here, when you think about a scrambling quarterback like Jaden Daniels, who is damn fast, who is going to be spying him like in a defensive context? Would it be Devin White? He's not there. Would it be KJ Britt? I think's the guy's name. A bum. Okay. What about Levante David? Oh, you mean the 35-year-old? He's going to chase down Jaden Daniels. I doubt it. So, I mean, it seems like Jaden will be able to run all over the Bucks. But then again, I could be wrong, but we'll see. Now, the last game in the wild card will be the Green Bay Packers against the Eagles. Now, this game, betting odds wise, is very difficult to parse through what you read on the internet because there is a caveat with my prediction, which I'll just say right now. I believe the Eagles will beat the Packers. Now, I'll stand by that, but the reason why people are floundering, and you can see that the prediction average right now is that Philadelphia wins by only like 51.2, which is like a 2 point majority odds of beating the Packers, And so that's a little disappointing because the on paper roster and the record seems to dictate that Philadelphia is looking really strong. But secondly, the other thing I wanted to say is that when it comes down to Philly, I do believe that this whole conundrum of whether or not Jalen Hurts is going to be injured is really why it's kind of depressing the betting odds and favoritism towards the Eagles. Now, I do believe strongly that Jalen Hurts will play, and if he doesn't, they will definitely lose to the Packers. And so, also, key thing to note, by the way, we do have news that Jair Alexander, I'm pretty sure, will not be starting against the Eagles. And so, think about it. You have to defend Devonta Smith, who's an amazing receiver, and then you have an even better guy in A.J. Brown. And they won't even have Jair Alexander to at least lock one of them down, presumably. So that's going to look like a mismatch to me. And so if Jalen's playing, it seems like a shoe-in for the Eagles to win at their home Link Stadium. I mean, it's going to be pretty easy, I think. And then beside that, they already beat the Packers already. And Saquon ran all over the Packers, and he's going to have a rest week over Josh Jacobs, I think. And so it's looking pretty good for. And also, the Packers lost the most recent game against the Bears pretty disturbingly. And so I think that the Packers are kind of paper mache low key. And so we're going to give this advantage to the Eagles right there. And also, key point as well. Marshawn Lattimore was an in-season trade weeks ago to the Commanders, and the Commanders, or the Redskins rather, will have a pretty good reason to think that they can lock down Mike Evans, where you see a rivalry for the past several years between Marshawn Lattimore and Mike Evans, and Lattimore tends to beat out Mike usually. So to the divisional, I can make a wild card only video, but let's just make it all one good thing here. My first prediction. So anyway, we are going to now just freestyle the rest of these predictions because again, you can't really use ESPN for stuff that hasn't even been announced yet. So we don't know who has won the wild card games yet. So this is me going out on a limb. But let's just start with the biggest one, arguably here. We're gonna do Buffalo Bills versus the away team, the Ravens. Okay, now this one's super difficult to predict. Two possible MVP candidates, obviously with these two guys. I do honestly think right now that the Bills will win. Now, this seems kind of like a contrarian thing to say because a lot of people are riding on the whole Lamar bandwagon, and I just don't respect that. Now, to be completely straightforward here, I'm trying to kind of like justify why the Bills will win more so than even the what's more likely to happen because I'm contrarian like that. So we're gonna say that the Bills will win by 3 at Buffalo because the weather is worse in Buffalo probably than it is in Maryland usually. That's a slight advantage to the Bills just out of being acclimatized. But then also when you look at the Bills offense, it is so variable and so evened out, like I said earlier, against so many like upper middle class sort of players that it makes it hard for like an elite top end sort of talented team like the Ravens to kind of contend with that. And so what this really begs the question of is, will Josh Allen perform at an MVP level? And I think he definitely will. He is pretty good in the playoffs, all things considered. He gets beat up by Mahomes, but it's because Mahomes is just that good, if anything. That being said, earlier in the season, I think the Ravens did beat the Bills, but I don't think that necessarily dictates too much here. Let's also keep in mind, chat, that the scrambling ability by Lamar is more accounted by the defense, respectively, of the Bills than would be the Josh Allen scrambling ability than by the Ravens. And so, as convoluted as that sounds, what I'm trying to say here is that Josh Allen has more tricks up his bag when it comes to him running and plowing over linebackers than does Lamar against the Bills, because people are already accounting for Lamar popping off for 80 yards in a game. But what people won't see is Allen running for 65, just low key. And so that might come at very crucial moments when it's like 3rd and 1, 4th and 2. Josh Allen just runs through the defense. We could see that happen, and it could turn it could just turn the cog of a victory here. And rambling aside, let's also keep in mind that the Bills are more desperate for this, I think, than the Ravens are. Hard to explain, but the drought seems more prescient for the Bills, who have not won one in this entire franchise history, whereas with the Ravens, they won one less than 15 years ago. Now, I'm giving this to the Bills, despite any sort of reason, besides the BS I just gave you. But we're going to look at the Chargers going against the Chiefs at Arrowhead. I think the Chiefs will win this one. The Chiefs are going to be likely already supplied with Marcus Hollywood Brown. They will have DeAndre Hopkins. They're going to have some other guy too, Pacheco as well. So their offense will be as healthy as it's ever been, aside from Rashee Rice being injured a long time ago. And so I think they're going to look more rejuvenized than they usually do in the regular season, and they have looked recently. There was a whole argument last year about how Travis Kelce was washed in the regular season, and then comes postseason. Last year when they won the Super Bowl, he's now playoff Kelce. Playoff as in, again, a nice name to say, like, whoa, you really stepped it up here. And so I think that Kelce will have the same effect where he kind of saves the juice until he really needs it, because he's like in his mid-30s at this point. And so that chemistry will bode well. When you look at the Chargers, though, the Chargers matchup-wise are actually pretty poised to look good, though. So this is a difficult thing to really argue, because, again, the Chargers and the Chiefs always play to their level. They always are winning or beating each other by like a touchdown either way. Typically with Mahomes winning like every single time, I think. Anyway, the point being, though, is that the tackles for the Chiefs are terrible, proportionate to the rest of the team. And so when you do have a defensive line by the Chargers, which is really bookended by the edge, and the middle's very crappy, you'll see that the edge talent like Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa will wreak havoc on these awful tackles that Mahomes has. So the Mahomes on most plays will probably have to step up in the center behind the 3 good O linemen in the center. And what you'll notice almost immediately is that depending on how open the receivers get, which again is dependent on the cornerbacks. I sound like I'm crazy, just long-winded arguing here, but I do think that the matchups basically favor the Chiefs a little more than it does the Chargers. And in big moments, obviously Mahomes, I think, will play better and more in a clutch way than he has been this past several months. And so again, playoff Mahomes, playoff Kelce, same mantra here. Do I want the Chiefs to win? Honestly, no, but okay. Okay, now looking at the Eagles versus the Vikings seems, I don't know, this seems kind of easy to predict. I do have the Eagles winning this one. Reason being, of course, that the Eagles having the home advantage is really strong. Playoff Eagles games are pretty crazy, as far as I know. Vikings, again, Darnold was really looking like he was scared at the moment, looking very anxious against the Lions prior to even the playoffs. It was a high-stakes game, obviously, for the first seed, but you could only imagine the divisional round being an even bigger spotlight. So unless he really compensates here, it seems like he might start fluttering some passes, overthrowing receivers, playing scared, seeing ghosts, like I said before. I think the Eagles are, on paper, as talented as the Vikings, if not better. I think that the reality is here that the corners for the Vikings aren't fantastic. You have one in Byron Murphy, who was with the Cardinals, and we let him go, unfortunately, but that seems to be about it. I think that really, I don't know what else to say here. I mean, Saquon's a better running back than AJ Dillon, or sorry, what's his name? Aaron Jones. And I do believe that, again, Darnold will play scared. Jalen Hurts, for whatever mediocre arm he has, doesn't play scared ever. So I'll give the battle here to the Eagles. That game would be pretty good to watch, though. And I'd say the Eagles probably win this one by 7. And then again, Bills win by 3, and then Chiefs would probably win this one by 7. My prediction. All right. Now, when it comes to Lions versus Commanders, I think the Lions will beat the Commanders by upwards of 10. Reason being is that the Lions' offense is hysterical. It's phenomenal. It's likely that they'll score upwards of 30 to 40 points against the Commanders, who do not have the best defense in the world. And I think the Commanders will similarly, on a bludgeoned defensive line and whatever else have you, for the Detroit Lions, will score upwards of 20 points, but they definitely will not keep up. I mean, you look at the weapons for the sake of Jaden McDaniel or whatever his name is. And Jaden Daniels has Terry McLaurin and not much else. Whereas the Lions have a plethora, and they might even get David Montgomery around this part of the season. So that's pretty inspiring for the Lions. Now, when you look at these two championship games, these are going to be really tough to decide, honestly. Um, the Bills did beat the Chiefs at Arrowhead, I'm pretty sure today, or sorry, in the regular season. So that's pretty promising. Also, the Chiefs weren't as healthy then as they are now. So that kind of changes things. It kind of evens things out. But given the fact that Mahomes has beat the Bills and Josh Allen like 2 or 3 times in a row in the playoffs, you got to think something's got to give. And I believe that this Bills team is more well rounded than any of the ones that has faced Kansas City up until this point. And so I do think that Josh Allen and the Bills will break the curse this one time. And if that's the case, they probably win by 3. I think the matchup here is pretty hard to really to find a certain there's a mismatch between this person and this person, because I'm not going to go out on a limb and say Von Miller will destroy Jawan Taylor. I mean, come on, it's Von Miller, 35-year-old, like isn't he washed? So anyway, Bills win that one in my opinion. Going out on a limb, but I'll back it. Now, NFC Championship, we have the Detroit Lions versus the Eagles. And I honestly do think that this one will be a nail biter. Now, the Eagles have a more well rounded team just because most of their defensive players are healthy and the Lions are suffering tremendously in that aspect. So for me to give it to the Lions is kind of like a homer thing because, again, I'm from Michigan originally. So that's my second team after the Cardinals. So this is going to be really difficult to not be biased on. Now, you have to keep in mind a few things. The Lions historically have a good defensive prowess when it comes to stopping the run, but they're missing their defensive tackles. So that's scary. They're starters, by the way. So Saquon could eat up the middle. That being said, though, what advantages does Detroit have? Well, I do think that Detroit, for that matter, will probably have a better offense than Philly. But does that mean the world? Because again, the defensive disparity here is pretty massive. I think the gulf between both teams and how healthy they are is pretty huge. Another thing I wanted to mention as an aside, though, is that when it comes down to it, I do see Goff not throwing any interceptions in this game. Like he historically doesn't throw picks, but Jalen Hurts could very well throw picks to opportunistic defensive player such as Brian Branch, who's pretty good, or Kirby Joseph, who has I think 7 picks on the season, which is pretty high. So with all that being said, though, I do believe that the Lions would lose this to the Eagles if you just use the logic that the Eagles have the way better defense. Like, just to put this in an autist point of view, like I view everything now, it's that the Lions have, let's say, a 10 out of 10 offense and a 3 out of 10 defense. Adds the 13. And then you've got the Eagles, who have, let's say, an 8 out of 10 offense and an 8 out of 10 defense. Well, while of course the offense goes to the Lions, the defensive disparity there makes up all the difference. So I think the visiting team will win. I think the Eagles would win this game by like 3. So there you go. Now, Eagles versus Bills. Who wins this one? This one's also incredibly difficult. They're playing this, I think, in New Orleans. And the thing about this one is that both are scrambling quarterbacks. One has a better arm than the other. One's higher IQ than the other, too, and that's Josh Allen. So objectively better quarterback. Team-wise, obviously, I think the Philadelphia Eagles, especially when it comes to running back, are definitely the better team on paper as well. So this is a hard one to really understand and pick. I'm pretty indecisive on it, actually. Okay, after thinking about it for 30 seconds, I'm going to give this one to the Buffalo Bills by 3 points. Reason being, Josh Allen is just way better as a quarterback than Jalen Hurts. And nothing lives more in my memory from the Super Bowl from, I think, 2 years ago than the exact moment when I think they had like a Fail Mary attempt, obviously. The Eagles tried to like save their life at the last second in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs. And Jalen Hurts underthrows like the goal line and the end zone by like 20 yards. Like he throws this like absolute piece of garbage 30-yard ball. Like, dude, where is your arm strength? Like your legs are good. Like, yeah, he has these quads. He can do the little tush push and what do you call it? Pad stat. But still, like Jalen Hurts has a weak ass arm. It's a noodle compared to like to his legs, like I said. And I think Josh Allen will run over people. And I think that, in all honesty, I think Josh Allen is just more. I'm imagining him like Arnold Schwarzenegger in the Predator movie. Okay, he's just a dog, outgunned. It doesn't matter. Better team on paper. It doesn't matter. I think Buffalo Bills will break. They will break the curse. They're going to win because think about it. They've lost 4 in a row. Odds of them losing 5 in a row is infinitesimal. So statistically, I think I'm backed by science. And so, anyways, I have the Bills winning by 3. That concludes my very incoherent, but probably genius, like astronomy level, like prediction or astrology, just dead on We'll see. We'll see. Am I better at sports predicting than politics? Surely not. Let's see how this ages. Comment down below what your predictions are, and comment down below after everything is over to see if I was right, and make fun of me if I'm wrong, but I won't be. We'll see. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want more content like this, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Adios.